and to look at the growing problems Addis Ababa is having with its neighbors. Alongside its myriad problems at home, the Abiy Ahmed government has increasingly faced trouble from abroad, and the most pressing trouble of all comes by way of the 1,600-kilometer border that it shares with Somalia. As we explained previously on this channel, landlocked Ethiopia has intensified its push for sea access over the course of the past year, and in January of 2024, the nation reached an agreement to use a port on the Somali coastline. But the trouble then, and the trouble now, is that the port Ethiopia agreed to use was not under the practical control of the Somali government. Instead, it was land under the control of the autonomous, self-governing region of Somaliland. And with Ethiopia going over Mogadishu's head to deal with its rogue province, it was only a matter of time before things came to a boiling point. But if Ethiopia was serving the role of a more powerful foreign backer for Somaliland, then the federal Somali government in Mogadishu had a foreign backer of its own. And that would be Egypt. And over the last month or so, Egypt has stepped up its involvement in this brewing conflict in a major way.
Hello everyone, welcome to Dirar for Africa. Today we dive deep into the rising tensions in the Horn of Africa, where diplomatic rows, regional rivalries, and external players are threatening to destabilize a crucial part of the continent. Ethiopia's controversial port deal in Somaliland has sparked a serious diplomatic clash with Somalia, pulling in major powers like Egypt and Eritrea into the fray. Could this turmoil lead to conflict across the region, disrupt global shipping routes, and even bring piracy back to the Red Sea? Join us as we explore the complex dynamics at play, featuring expert insights from Hassan Hanejeh and of the Horn of Africa International Institute for Strategic Studies. Stay tuned as we break down the key players, potential outcomes, and the global stakes of this growing crisis. Let's get into it.
During that time, the Egyptian military has delivered at least 2 substantial weapons caches to Somalia, one that came by way of several loaded planes in August, and another more major one delivered by warship in late September. Aboard that warship were anti-aircraft guns and artillery pieces, items that the Somali military technically possessed in its arsenal in limited numbers already, but may have been in a state of disrepair. Blocking off nearby roads, Somalia took possession of its new weapons and sent them straight to military bases and defense buildings, while Egypt openly acknowledged its, quote, ongoing central role in supporting Somali efforts. And Egypt's recent work in Somalia goes a good deal past just sending weaponry. In August, Cairo and Mogadishu signed a security pact vowing to send 5,000 Egyptian troops to Somalia as part of a new peacekeeping mission by the end of 2024. Those troops would replace some 10,000 Ethiopian troops in the country, who Somalia has threatened to expel by the year's end if Ethiopia doesn't disengage from its agreement with breakaway Somaliland. All the while, Ethiopian and Egyptian tensions have been frayed for other reasons, largely relating to the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which has now filled its reservoir as an Ethiopian section of the Blue Nile tributary. The Blue Nile and the larger Nile River that it flows into are indispensable sources of water for Egypt, with 85% of water in the Nile coming by way of this particular tributary. If used for the nearly completed dam, the water could provide hydroelectric power to 60% of Ethiopians who live today without electricity, and even provide power for export to neighbor nations. But in doing so, it can throttle Egypt's population, whose water comes almost entirely from the Nile. Ethiopia has already showed a willingness to cause problems for Egypt downstream. For example, when Ethiopia's new reservoir was filling, the country ignored Egypt's call for a slow filling process across anywhere from 12 to 21 years. Instead, Ethiopia diverted enough water to fill it in 3. After the dam controversy, tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia have only risen further. Egypt has insisted that its share of water from the Nile is a red line, something that it will not tolerate Ethiopia pushing boundaries on, and it's been clear that it treats its water share as a matter of national security. Egypt takes the same national security approach when dealing with the idea of Ethiopian port access to the Red Sea potentially causing major problems for Egypt in a second spot. Egypt gains tremendous value from the passage of trade ships through the Suez Canal, connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean via an artificial waterway, and while Ethiopia wouldn't be parking a port directly at the Suez Canal, it can still cause major problems. Ethiopia revived its navy in 2018 2014 and has since signed accords with France to aid in building a new naval arm, although it now works with neighbouring Djibouti to base its operations there since it's still landlocked. And Ethiopia, with both a potential fleet of ships in a decade or two's time that can blockade the Suez Canal and simultaneously exert nearly full control of the Nile River, is a major threat to Egypt's future at a time when the country is both among the most populous and fastest growing nations in the world. Add to that the not unlikely prospect of Abiy Ahmed himself still being in power in a decade or two at the age of 48 now and showing all the signs that he's unlikely to let himself get pushed out. For Egypt, it's easy to see a strengthening Ethiopia as an existential threat, and Ethiopia's rhetoric has shifted to match, with Abiy Ahmed issuing grave warnings against any offensive action that Egypt or any other nation might consider taking against him. But now, with Somalia and its internal breakaway region Somaliland caught in the middle, the table is set for the start of a proxy conflict. With Ethiopia and Somaliland already firmly aligned in their priorities, Egypt's decision to send weapons to the Somali government already speaks volumes. But add to that a turn of events where Egyptian troops take the place of Ethiopian ones, and it's a different ballgame. Such a move would place Egyptian assets not just within striking range of Somaliland, but of Ethiopia itself, particularly if the projected 5,000 Egyptian troops are just the start. Remember, like the overlapping diplomatic conflict around Ethiopia's dam, these two countries are in the early stages of a fight with the potential to last for decades. And over the span of a decade, as a hypothetical Ethiopian port is first built, then expanded and militarized on the Somaliland's coastline, it's not at all difficult to envision a simultaneous buildup of Egyptian troops as a counterweight. Factor in border disputes, troop encounters, diplomatic and military mishaps, and more, and the start of a true proxy conflict is just inches away. Factor in competition over natural resources like water and a potential cycle of military escalation as Ethiopia builds a navy and Egypt tries to be a counterweight against it, and now we're in the realm of a small-scale but very real Cold War. And if such a prospect seemed far-fetched, then think again, because as each day goes by in the region, more signs and signals emerge that such a proxy conflict is imminently on the horizon. In late September, Somalia launched a new set of accusations against Ethiopia, claiming that its more powerful neighbor had sent a shipment of arms to Somalia's other breakaway region, Puntland. Although Somalia didn't specify what the weapons in question were or when they were shipped, Puntland stands accused of receiving 2 lorries worth of weapons transported from Ethiopia with no clearance or approval by the Somali government. Locals in Puntland's capital, Garo, confirm that they had witnessed a convoy under escort by Puntland's own security and heard talk of a coming shipment from Ethiopia. If the allegations are true, then that would mean that Ethiopia has secured cooperation with not just one, but both of Somalia's major breakaway regions. Although Somaliland and Puntland have their own bitter rivalries, they together comprise well over a third of Somali territory, with about 10.5 million residents shared between them and a shared history of armed resistance to the Somali government. If such powerful rivals were to ally together with Ethiopia's support, then Somalia would only grow more desperate for Egyptian backing, and the cycle just continues from there. As Egypt and Ethiopia continue to maneuver around Somalia, subtlety has increasingly fallen by the wayside. In early October, the leaders of both Egypt and Somalia, along with the leader of Eritrea, had a meeting in Eritrea's capital city, Asmara. There, the group's closing statements issued to the press included overt nods to, quote, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the countries in the region. When Egypt, Somalia, and Eritrea go out of their way to make such a unified statement, there's only one likely target: the nation caught in the middle. International experts didn't mince words about the true meaning of the 3 nations coming together, said African Horn expert Hassan Kaneji, speaking to the BBC, quote, "This is an axis against Addis Ababa."
Somalia has expelled a senior Ethiopian diplomat. It's the latest sign of unraveling ties between the 2 neighbors triggered in January, when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed struck a deal to establish a port in the breakaway region of Somaliland. The row has brought Eritrea, Egypt, and Mogadishu closer. So could rising tensions in the Horn of Africa plunge the region into conflict and affect global shipping? The Horn of Africa, which includes Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, has a turbulent past. But tensions have raised fears that other countries could be drawn in. That's because of its strategic location on the Red Sea, opposite Gulf states and its abundant natural resources. Let's take a look back at what has led to this point. On January 1st, Ethiopia signed a deal with Somaliland, giving it access to the nation's Red Sea port and permission to establish a naval base in the breakaway region. In exchange, Addis Ababa has agreed to recognize Somaliland as an independent state. Somalia considers Somaliland a part of its territory. In response to the deal, Mogadishu recalled its ambassador from Addis Ababa and expelled the Ethiopian ambassador. There are Ethiopian troops who are part of the African Union peacekeeping mission to fight Al-Shabaab based in Somalia. Mogadishu is threatening to expel them if Ethiopia fails to scrap the port deal. In August, Egypt signed a security pact with Somalia and supplied it military weapons for the first time in 4 decades. Cairo also offered to send troops to a new peacekeeping mission in Somalia that could replace the 10,000 Ethiopian peacekeepers. All this added to Egypt's long-standing rivalry with Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam built on the Nile. In an effort to ease the simmering tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia, Turkey mediated 2 rounds of talks in July and August, with the third one postponed in September. No resolution has been reached so far. And in October, leaders of Egypt, Somalia and Eritrea, who have all strained relations with Ethiopia, met in the Eritrean capital, Asmara, and agreed to help the Somali army confront terrorism. Let's hear more from Hassan Hanenje. He's a director with the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. He joins me from Nairobi, Kenya. Hanenje, thank you so much for talking to us here on Africa Matters today. Is the Horn of Africa on the brink of an all-out war in your assessment?
I wouldn't characterize it as being on the brink of an all-out war, but the risk of escalation is certainly high, considering the current tensions, not just as a result of the MOU between Addis Ababa and Somaliland, but also the ongoing conflagrations in Sudan and in complete, of course, issues in South Sudan, as well as elsewhere in the region. So the risk is high, but all-out war is not imminent, but the risk is high.
So when you're saying that the risk is high, what do you mean by that exactly?
Firstly, for instance, insofar as, for instance, the MOU is concerned, today, Somalia doesn't exactly have the capacity to militarily confront Ethiopia in conventional terms. However, considering the current arrangement where you're having external players, including recently the Egyptian involvement in aiding Somalia, as well as the kind of tripartite discussions that are going on between Eritrea, Somalia, and Egypt, the post-ATMI scenario, where, for instance, Egyptian forces may be, present in Somalia, may exacerbate a situation in which you may see action from Addis Ababa, which, of course, then may attract a response from those forces that probably have built an axis within Somalia.
So, Hanenje, tensions between Eritrea, Somalia, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and it's not anything new as we speak. So, what needs to change to de-escalate and manage them?
One, there is no alternative to diplomacy. Mogadishu and Addis Ababa, they need to talk. Now, it may be a challenge for them to talk directly, in part because the tensions are extremely high. And that is why it is going to be important that there is a third party. And I think in recent months, you've seen Ankara try to play that role. That is going to be central if actually a de-escalation is going to be achieved. In the absence of that, I think we may spiral out of control in the coming months and years.
But these third parties, Hanenje, it's good you're talking about some of the third parties, including Turkey, that has been at the forefront in ensuring that these 2 countries, specifically Ethiopia and Somalia, get a lasting solution. But away from Turkey, there's some other external actors who've been accused of actually fueling the tensions that we are currently seeing in the Horn of Africa.
Yes, certainly. You have external actors, some both from the continent as well as from outside, and this has complicated the efforts by both regional institutions such as IGAD to bring about a solution, but also even other external players, including the role that Ankara is trying to play. And for instance, what I just explained, the recent engagement is, by Egypt, of course, complicates, the equation within the Horn of Africa. Now, Egypt is a friend to a number of countries in the region, and therefore, of course, they're entitled to engage which country they choose. But to the extent that such interventions, as well as the others from outside, actually Africa, seem to be complicating the security architecture in the region, I think is by and large, going to be harmful if there is no consensus with regard to who should be in this theater and who should be in Somalia in particular in the post-ATMIS environment.
So let me pick your mind on this, Hanenje. What is likely then to be the fallout in Somalia and the region?
One of the challenges is going to be that it's likely to affect the security and stability of Somalia in the post-ATMIS environment. In part because the ongoing tensions do not bode well for our collective action. Number two, the continued tensions are going to inspire and swell the ranks of extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab, who may ride the nationalistic fervor that may come or may arise from these tensions to swell their ranks as well as mobilize for resources. And so continued tensions are not good, both for the region as well as for partners for regional partnerships of countries outside the region, including the Middle East, as well as Europe and even the United States.
So, Hanenje, I would not be wrong to ask you these questions about the tensions in the Horn of Africa. Is it likely, or are they likely to affect global shipping, as some have suggested?
Yes. To the extent to which, for instance, the conflict may escalate to affect the Red Sea, which is a critical passageway, then it can affect international shipping. But also a potential return of piracy as a result of breakdown of rule and order and absence of collective action may, of course, certainly affect global shipping, kind of reminiscent of the days in the 2010s when piracy was actually running rampant, within the region, and it significantly imposed the cost of, maritime as well as navigation and business as well as the economies, in the region. So yes, there is a real danger that that's going to be affected.
Hassan Hanenje, Director with the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, was talking to us from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for talking to us here on Africa Matters.
Thanks for having me.